Hello, it's Missy.
And April.
And we're here with our podcast,
Sheela Na Gig.
How are you guys doing? Thanks for tuning in. We're excited you're here. And each week, of course, we present and explore our own Sheela Na Gig, a woman whose strength and perseverance has led to greatness, who empowers us, who inspires us, and maybe even one who has been underappreciated or never even acknowledged.
Exactly, or very unappreciated.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's. How are you, April?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. I was just sharing a story with April that I almost got attacked by a pit bull the other night, but...
Yeah, that was scary. But you know what Missy did that was amazing? Tell them what you did. 'Cause I like
Well,
that.
no, I just went into, like, I even though I'm a really hyper person, generally, I have this thing in emergency situations where I go into complete calm. It's just something I do pretty naturally, which is a good thing.
It's a great thing, especially around animals.
Yeah, with the kids, it's like there's an emergency with the kids. Like, my husband's always like, you got to take them to the hospital. You're the one, because I get very calm, you know. But yeah, I was taking my kids out, and my daughter and her 3 friends were having a sleepover, and we were walking in the neighborhood, and they were like 10 feet in front of me. It was nighttime. We were walking back to my house, and out of the shadows, this giant pit bull. And he had a leash on, but no person. And he was very big, and he was kind of growling at me. And fortunately, like I said, the kids were 10 feet ahead of me. So I just simply waved them on with my hand, not to make too much commotion. And I just kind of stood there very calmly with my hands out. And eventually the dog kind of came over and started rubbing up against me like a cat.
Well, that's better than grabbing onto your arm and not letting go.
I know, exactly. That which happened to your sister.
Right, my sister did. She got attacked by a pit bull. She was doing field work as a social worker, and she went into somebody's yard, and the pit bull came out of nowhere and sunk his teeth into her arm, and she also got very
so fucking
calm.
scary.
Scary.
Yeah.
But she got calm, and she said, let go, and miraculously the dog did, but he really punctured her skin.
Oof.
She required several stitches.
Wow.
But
wow.
This is a good public service announcement that if you can, please stay calm around.
Stay calm. I love dogs, and he actually ended up
too.
being very sweet, and I don't know, but I found its owner too, but yeah, that's another story. That's for another episode.
Another day. Meantime, I'm glad you're okay.
Thank you. And how was Father's Day?
Father's Day was
Happy Father's Day to Stephen.
Thank you, and to Mike.
Yay! Yes.
And apparently we both had really good stay-at-home days with our
Yeah,
kids.
we went geocaching, and I want to
That's
tell everybody that
right.
geocaching is still alive and well in Los Angeles. We did some amazing geocaching in Alhambra. Some people say Alhambra, but I feel like I shouldn't say that because it sounds so Michigan. Alhambra. And we got to see this pretty famous mansion that I'd never seen before, but that's where Phil Spector used to live. And when, that whole murder thing happened and he murdered that former model, it was at this mansion in Alhambra.
Wow.
So there we were outside the mansion. But there's some really good geocaching in Alhambra, and I recommend it. It was really fun, super fun. And you guys had a cookout.
We did. My adult 20-year-old kids who are off in college came home, and they cooked dinner. They barbecued, and it was just the 4 of us, which we haven't been just the 4 of us. Usually there's a significant other, a boyfriend, a girlfriend. But this was just the 4 of us, and it was really fun.
That's so nice.
Yeah.
That's so good. Well, I'm glad it was good for both of us. It was, yeah. I'm glad your kids got along, my kids got along.
There are miracles in life.
Exactly. But anyway, with no further ado here, we're on to our Sheela of the day, as we like to call them.
And of course, I have no idea who the Sheela is.
Well, she kind of cheated.
Well, I did. I cheated.
So I'll admit, when she got here, I was still printing this out and finishing it, and she was kind of pissed. Don't get on April's bad side. She was like, I am leaving. Okay, I'm totally leaving. If you're not done in 10 minutes, I am fucking walking out the door.
I said that 45 minutes into.
Okay, I admit it. What does she want? I made her a fucking cup of coffee.
Okay, yeah. She getting coffee.
It's a beautiful day.
Start the Sheela.
Okay.
So anyway, I did peek at the last page and said, "Oh, are we doing so and so?" Which I won't reveal. But that's all I know.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's true. I really don't know our Sheela because I don't know a lot about her.
And I just want to say again, we use Sheela as our own little term, by the way. I know it can be, some people consider it certainly not derogatory in our case. Like we're taking it from the word Sheela Na Gig, which most of you who listened to our first episode know what that is. If you don't, you might want to go back and listen to our first episode. But anyway, so many simply know her as the wife of the famous novelist F.Scott Fitzgerald.
That's how I know her.
Yes. But Zelda Fitzgerald was special in her own right, an icon of the 1920s and one of the most relevant figures of the so-called jazz age.
Well, that's really interesting because all I knew was she was married to.
See, doesn't that suck? Like defined by your fucking husband, right?
Yeah,
like, oh, please.
Well,
Okay. So anyway, she was one of the first American flappers, and this term was actually developed by her husband. And it represents an idealized yet carefree woman of the roaring 20s. And of course, flappers were a generation of young women who defied the norms and showed a blatant disrespect for what was considered acceptable behavior at that time. They didn't wear corsets and they wore they wore knee-length skirts. And
like showing off those knees.
Exactly, I know. They cut their hair into bobs. They listened to jazz.
Oh, how scandalous!
That dark music,
right?
And that scary, dark, evil music. And they drank in public.
Oh, what hussies!
I know. But however, above everything else, Zelda was an artist. She was a dancer, a writer, a painter, and of course, most importantly, a writer. And that. What many people don't know, perhaps because history has gone to great lengths to hide the truth, is that F.Scott Fitzgerald owes much of his success as a writer to Zelda.
Really?
Not only did he use her as a muse, but he also unscrupulously stole her ideas and writing.
Oh my gosh, you're kidding.
No.
Oh, it's so funny. I was going to joke and say, what, was she really the brains behind all of his best-selling
You were
work?
going to joke. You were going to joke about that, weren't you?
I was. Yep, that's exactly where I was going.
Okay, now this claim is considered a little bit controversial.
Okay.
But there seems to be quite a bit to substantiate it.
Tell.
And I will be sharing this with you today, but I want to start out with, I want to give you the whole background to start with. Okay? So
set us straight.
I want to tell you a little bit about Zelda and her beginnings, because again, most people just know her as F.Scott Fitzgerald's wife.
Okay, just to be clear, a little bit batty, a little bit crazy was sort of the stereotype that I knew about good old Zelda.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was a kid, it was always Zelda, Queen of the Jungle. And I don't know if that originated from Zelda Fitzgerald, but
Zelda, Queen of the Jungle?
That was some euphemism in my childhood home, that if you were Zelda, you were sort of crazy, like a jungle woman. And I don't know if it had anything to do with Zelda Fitzgerald, but I, in my little young brain, combined those two, and so it just reinforced the idea that she was just crazy.
Wait, I didn't think it was Zelda. I thought it was somebody else was Queen of the Jungle.
Well, don't mess with my childhood reality.
I won't.
In my home, it was Zelda, Queen of the Jungle.
Now, I remember my mom...
Yes.
Who was slightly batshit crazy. No, I loved my mom. But my mom did have some...
quirky behaviors.
Yeah. She did have some, potentially mental illness. But my mom was like, she saw Zelda as this total heroine. She loved Zelda. And she used to talk to me about her as a kid.
Oh, I had no idea.
And say that she was this brilliant, she was a brilliant artist and that she was underestimated. But I didn't quite know what that meant. Like, I didn't quite know, underestimated in what way. And my mom said it's very sad because, she just became kind of known as this just crazy person, and nobody really got to know her substance. And she was, F.Scott Fitzgerald's muse, and you know what I mean? So anyway, I kind of always knew that about her. But anyway, she was born in Montgomery, Alabama on July 24th, 1900. And she was the youngest of 6 children. And her father, Anthony Dickinson Sire, I don't know if that's how you pronounced it. It's Sayre. I should have looked that up. Sire.
Yeah,
I'm going to say
sure.
Sire.
Okay.
Sayre. I'm going to say Sayre. Sayre was a powerful man. He was the Supreme Court Justice of Alabama. And additionally, both Zelda's great uncle and grandfather had served in the United States Senate. Zelda's mother, Minerva, or Minnie, as they called her, Buckner Mahan Sayre, was the daughter of Senator Willis B. Macon. So she was an artist and she was an eccentric person, her mother, and she spoiled young Zelda. She loved her daughter and she spoiled her. And Zelda proved to be both athletic and artistic. She was equally interested in her ballet lessons and in spending time outdoors. She was also just very creative, always writing, always keeping journals. She loved music. She loved dancing. So she was very creative, and she was high-spirited and a wayward child. And although she was a clever student, Zelda was mostly uninterested in her studies.
Really?
Yeah, imagine that. And as a girl, again, she began keeping these diaries, like religiously. She kept diaries. She wrote constantly. And they would later prove to be the earliest sign of her creative mind, containing much more than a rote record of her social activities. She was definitely a poet from the time she was very young. Beautiful, beautiful. And you can read her poetry, you can read some of her writing. It is out there. She was a beautiful writer. Pearl? My dog's making a little noise over there. Sorry. Okay. So by the time she reached high school, Zelda was beautiful, spirited, and rebellious and became the center of her social circle. And she was beautiful.
Well, else we remember about Zelda, that
yes.
she was beautiful, charismatic, that people were drawn to her, that men found her very attractive, women found her very charming. I do remember that.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And her desire to be unconventional and rebellious meant that she smoked, she drank alcohol, she snuck out of her parents' house to spend time with boys. This is all while she was in high school, too.
Well, but so far, she sounds like your average teenager.
I was going to say, she sounds like me. God, like, you're right. She does sound like, but in those times, like in the deep South, like she's in the South. Yeah, right. She's in the South. And like, there was, and her parents were like, in politics right. And, very esteemed couple. So it was kind of scandalous. And her friends described her as fearless, daring, attention-seeking, and provocative. And it was, of course, much to the chagrin of her esteemed family. She also enjoyed causing minor scandals by doing things like dancing flapper style or swimming in a tight, flesh-toned bathing suit to purposely fuel rumors that she was swimming naked in public.
I love it.
I love her. I would have been friends with her for sure.
You definitely would have been.
Would you have been friends with her?
I would have been intrigued by her. I probably would have been so mesmerized, but maybe a little intimidated.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I would have been friends with her for sure. Her brash, daring nature was even more shocking because women of her social status were expected to be compliant and docile. Zelda and her friend, future Hollywood actress Tallulah Bankhead, were frequently the topic of gossip, raising eyebrows of the genteel set in her southern hometown. Zelda was on her way. Right. All right, so following her high school graduation, she did graduate from high school, despite her scandalous life. In 1918, she first met the 22-year-old Scott, as he went by then. F.Scott Fitzgerald.
F.Scott Fitzgerald.
It was at a weekend country club dance, and he was actually stationed at an Army base just outside of Montgomery, Alabama. And she was a regular at such social activities, and he was an Army lieutenant awaiting orders to fight overseas during wartime. And side note, their first meeting at that country club dance would later be the basis for the first meeting between Jay Gatsby and Daisy Buchanan in The Great Gatsby.
Which infamously or famously seemed to mirror the relationship between
quite a bit.
F.Scott and Zelda.
Quite a bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So Scott had always found it easy to interest girls by talking up his literary ambitions and asking them, what sort of heroine would you like to be? He quickly perceived, though, that to attract then 18-year-old Zelda, it would demand more. Locals had to wait months for a date with her.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I love that.
She's very popular. And Army aviators were vying with one another to get her attention. Regularly, they flew stunts over the Sayre home to get her attention, and they were risky enough sometimes to cause collisions.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, I don't think they did, but they were risky enough to potentially cause collisions. So, yeah.
Well, she was beautiful.
Yeah. That would be kind of impressive to like
Yeah.
have boys that love you so much that they're doing like stunts over your home in their planes.
Risking their lives.
Yes,
The ultimate compliment.
I guess, yeah. So Scott, suited in a uniform of Brooks Brothers cut, not only boasted that he intended to be a famous author and had Francis Scott Key as his ancestor. He was actually best known for writing the Star-Spangled Banner. But he also suggested that the female lead in his novel in progress was a girl a lot like Zelda.
Imagine.
And that was true, albeit only because she resembled the young heiress who dumped him in Chicago. Still, he intrigued her enough to take him seriously and to try him out sexually,
Why not?
in spite of his poverty and her intention only to marry wealthy.
Uh-huh.
And from the start, their courtship was both passionate and tempestuous. And it was quickly apparent that Scott and Zelda shared a worldview and had similarly creative personalities, so it kind of worked.
Yep.
And they began a courtship,
Uh-huh.
but Zelda was still very hesitant about his financial prospects and uncertain professional future. So she continued to court several other suitors as well, leaving her options open.
I like that.
Well, can you blame her? She's 18. She's gorgeous.
Yeah, I guess
She's
she had
talented. She's smart.
She had plenty of choices.
Mm-hmm.
And he was impoverished.
Yes.
Okay. So then what happened?
What? That's so shallow. April, wait a second.
I didn't say she was shallow. She was confident.
No, I was saying you're shallow.
Oh, I thought.
Like, yeah, we know
shallow.
she was shallow, but come on.
She wasn't shallow.
Are
She
you
was this deep artist.
No, are you
Brilliant.
seconding that? Like, yeah. Well, I don't have any
No,
money.
you know what it is? You know, honestly,
Yeah.
let's get serious for a second. I love that she was discerning, that she was, just because he was exciting and creative and he
Right.
shared all this stuff and it was passionate, she just kept her sensibility. She didn't lose her head.
No, that's
you know?
true.
And so I think that's admirable.
Because I think she was really attracted to him intellectually and creatively.
Yeah.
But I think that she also wanted an extravagant life and
Yeah.
knew that she was capable of receiving that.
Right?
So you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
I always think of like my sister married an amazing man, but he when my sister met him, he was like out of the army and he hadn't gone to college, and my sister had gone to college, and they met in the South, and I remember my mom being like, you can't marry him. He's not college educated. You know, yes, he's a nice guy. He's a wonderful guy, but that doesn't get you anything in life. You are a college educated woman. You need to redirect your affections and find somebody else. And
most young girls say, but I'm in love.
Right.
And Zelda paused and said, you may not make enough dough for my standards.
exactly.
I'm just admiring her pause.
Right. Yeah. My mom always said you can marry. We talked about this before. You can marry a rich man. You can marry a poor man, but it doesn't hurt to fall in love with a rich man, right? No. But so anyway, long story short, my sister married her husband, and
he got a college education.
yeah, he's now a nurse practitioner. He's very successful,
Excellent.
and they're very happily married. And
And mom was wrong.
she was wrong.
See?
She was completely wrong. Yeah. So anyway.
And so was Zelda, because she married F.Scott. Okay, go
Right.
ahead.
All right. So to make matters worse, the relationship certainly was not approved by Zelda's parents, and the account that Fitzgerald was an alcoholic in their estimation and a Catholic.
Oh, horror.
I know, with no prospects for a prosperous future in their opinion.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Oh, damn alcoholic Catholic. Scott began submitting his manuscripts for hopeful publishing, but after Scribner's rejected his novel for a second time and the war had ended, he decided to move to New York and turned to advertising as a steady source of income to entice Zelda.
Ah.
At this
Things
point-
you do for love.
That's right. And at this point, she kind of agreed to marry him, but it was contingent upon his financial success.
She knew what she wanted.
It was a loose engagement.
Okay.
A lot went on. There's so much in this story that I am skating over a lot.
Yeah.
I have to.
You have to, or we would be here all night.
Yes, it's true. But I have to just mention that F.Scott Fitzgerald, like, he ended up working in advertising, and he did not have any success, and he kept submitting his manuscripts, and like he eventually like went back home to I think it's like somewhere in the Midwest. He went back home, and he became a recluse for a while and lived with his parents, and he carried like a gun around and kept threatening suicide, and like he was in a big deep funk. But
Yeah, he was sort of a gloomy guy. Or he had his moments.
He had his moments, yeah. But, he did continue to have a constant stream of passionate and argumentative love letters, and it punctuated the period of their engagement. And Scott eventually did go back to New York and continue to kind of work in advertisement and continue to try to publish his books. And Zelda remained at her parents' home in Montgomery. And, Zelda also was excited to kind of move on in her life. She was ready. She was, she knew that marriage would represent a new lease on life. And it was the only way out of her small town existence. And, she didn't have any rights of her own at that time. Like that's how women were able to get on, with their lives, is to find a suitor, and move somewhere.
Isn't that amazing? Because she was a woman of privilege.
Yeah.
Her parents had means, and yet she still needed that man to define
right?
her. Isn't that, yeah. And
Yeah.
she had all these talents.
Of course, we've talked about some women on our episodes who did kind of defy those.
Definitely. Didn't do it with men, didn't never marry.
Yeah.
Didn't stay married. Yeah.
Right. So, for a year, Scott continued to struggle unsuccessfully to make his fortune, and Zelda began to grow tired of waiting for him. And when he professed that he could not be successful without her by his side and beckoned for her, she broke off the engagement because she felt too much pressure, and she insisted that he must first find success on his own. But
yes,
finally, this just goes on. After much perseverance, he was able to publish his first novel in March of 1920.
Well, praise be God.
I know. And when Fitzgerald had met Zelda, he was actually already writing this book, and it was called This Side of Paradise. It was his first novel, and in fact, he was so enchanted by Zelda that he changed the main character of Rosalind Connage to match Zelda's personality and quirks.
So she was already showing up in his work.
Yep.
In his earliest work.
In his earliest work.
Mm-hmm.
And This Side of Paradise made Scott rich within a year.
Ooh.
So Zelda married him a week after its publication in New York.
I'm telling you, Zelda knew what she wanted, and that was,
On April 3rd, they married, April 3rd. And
much to her parents' chagrin.
Yeah.
Or were they happy because he made?
Probably, I don't really know. I should look that up. But he was still an alcoholic Catholic, though.
That's true.
She
That.
could have married another successful man who was not an alcoholic and a Catholic. So I presume maybe they weren't that happy. But anyway, so as his wife, she embarked on a new life as a flapper.
Woo.
Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, my life as a flapper.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be a flapper.
And again, I think it's interesting how I found some evidence to suggest that he kind of created that name.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she was a free-thinking woman with the world at her disposal. And of course, again, This Side of Paradise was his immediate success, and the couple became overnight celebrities, both of them. Mm-hmm. And in rendering the youthful rebellion of the 1920s, Scott became known as the chronicler of the jazz age, and Zelda became known as the emblem of the 1920s liberated woman.
Wow.
Quite a couple.
Quite a couple.
They both indulged in an extravagant lifestyle, spending beyond their means to travel, to have parties. They loved to drink liquor. They were the cream of New York society and known for the vitality, youthfulness, and buoyant personalities.
That is the F.Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda Fitzgerald.
And guess who they were friends with?
Who?
Caress and Harry Crosby.
Of course they were.
That's a whole other chapter, but I thought it was interesting. Their paths crossed. Well, you'll see, there's a lot of, obviously,
yes,
there's a lot of,
Crosby and Zelda Fitzgerald being friends makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, doesn't
works.
it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the first years of marriage continued to be marked by excess, specifically lots of parties and lots of alcohol. The birth of their only daughter, Frances, Scotty, isn't that cute? She was called Scotty Fitzgerald. A year after their marriage in 1921 did not stop this. Instead, they employed servants and nannies in order to be able to continue maintaining their unsustainable lifestyles. Who does this sound like?
I love it.
It sounds exactly like Caress and Harry, right?
Right. They're unsustainable, to sustain their unsustainable lifestyle.
Exactly. I know. Maintain their unsustainable. Yeah, exactly. And I will mention, too, another little side note, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah.
They were actually pregnant several times.
Oh.
And throughout the course of their marriage, Zelda had several abortions because it was not conducive to their lifestyle.
It didn't sound it, yeah.
But apparently, they did choose to keep Scotty. Scotty was kind of like the chosen one.
Was she the first, or?
That I'm not entirely sure of. I don't believe she was. I don't believe she was the first one. But at this particular time, they decided like this was their daughter. This was the child they wanted to keep. And they had plenty of money, and they were, So Fitzgerald's passion but tumultuous marriage to Zelda was widely known throughout their friend group, and they attended parties, and at these parties sometimes they would get into like shouting matches. They would be like pushing each other. People remember there was a lot of like volatility between them. But regardless, F. Scott there held very, very deep toxic love and admiration for Zelda, as it was quoted here. He went as far as saying that she was his muse.
Mm-hmm. Well, apparently.
She was his muse.
Tell us more.
Yes. And Fitzgerald's second novel, The Beautiful and the Damned, was published in 1922 and propelled him and Zelda further into the cultural elite. But to maintain his affluent lifestyle, he also wrote numerous stories for popular magazines such as the Saturday Evening Post and Esquire. And like their marriage, the Fitzgeralds' creative relationship went to extremes that no couple could be expected to endure. Not quite innocent from the start. Going back to F.Scott Fitzgerald, he actually was an alcoholic from a very young age. Oh. Mm-hmm. And apparently his alcohol abuse began when he attended Princeton University. In 1916, and he drank excessively, and it worsened every year, displaying drunken outbursts at parties and public events, and often making a great fool of himself. And this behavior continued.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, and and often involved Zelda, and at her expense, and that kind of thing. So that was hard. And he also would get in these drunken outbursts, and he would get violent, and he would get into verbal and physical fights with others. That is another thing that's kind of like, it seems that there's a lot of evidence that he was emotionally abusive towards Zelda.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
But there's also some indication that he was possibly physically abusive toward her as well.
Oh, wow.
More unsubstantiated, but there's definitely some evidence of that, or so it seems. But these drunken outbursts would usually end up with him having blackouts and memory loss. He often wouldn't remember things that had happened the night before. And it kind of just became like part of their regular life.
Sounds like an alcoholic.
I dated a guy like that. Wait a second. In my 20s, I dated quite a few addicted men. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I remember like all the calls I would make the next day, like apologizing. And sometimes on behalf of myself too, because like
you were calling the other people.
Yeah, and sometimes not to say I was completely innocent, because I too drank my share in those days, but like it was often be like I would be like calling to like make excuses or cover up for my boyfriend or like God.
Yeah, I sort of had a father like that, and the mom would cover up and all that stuff. Moving right along.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Scott, sometimes I call him Scott, sometimes I call him Fitzgerald, sometimes I call him F.Scott Fitzgerald, but you know who I'm talking about, just, okay.
Yep.
Zelda is Zelda.
Zelda's husband.
Yeah, he's Zelda's husband.
There you go.
That's all he is. All right, no. He made his stints in AA, and he did make an effort to dry out many times. Sadly, he never recovered from alcoholism. It took a toll on his life, on his family, and it continued all his life. And they say he was hospitalized at least 8 times between 1933 and 1937 for alcoholism.
Goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
He had a pretty serious addiction there.
Yeah, she was kind of a widow to his alcohol. Mm-hmm. His alcohol abuse, it seems. But in 1924, the Fitzgeralds decided to make a fresh start in France, where they joined a group of American expatriates, like the Crosbys.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where he became friends with Hemingway and all kinds of stuff. And it's interesting, too, because like the Crosbys, their life was crazy and extravagant, and they were hanging out with all these other expats and a lot of artists and writers. And at one point, F.Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway became very close friends, and Zelda was very jealous and accused him of having a gay relationship.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah, of being a homosexual, and it was like scandalous and whatever else. And that's unsubstantiated as well. But, you know, she was kind of threatened by the relationship, interestingly enough. So the over-the-top parties continued. It carried them to periods of you know, infidelity. They were both...
Yeah, they didn't sound like the monogamous types.
No, they were both very jealous, but they were both cheating on one another. There were money issues, there were arguments, they were spending more than they had. And especially, though, Scott was jealous. He was a little bit more jealous, it seems, than Zelda. She was jealous, too. And at this point, he became so engrossed in working on his next novel, The Great Gatsby, that Zelda ended up falling in love with a French pilot, Edouard Jousson. Mm-hmm. You know, naturally, Zelda was a little bored. She was a little bored.
Yeah.
He was completely engrossed in his novel and alcohol. And so she found someone new to interest her and to make her once again more interesting to Scott than mere fiction. And that man, he was a French lieutenant. He was dark and handsome. And he really struck her fancy. So... and at first, Scott was delighted because he was like, oh, thank God, here's a distraction for my wife. She'll leave me the fuck alone. I can work on my book and I don't have to worry about her.
Typical husband attitude.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, typical, yeah. But what began as a convenient distraction, of course, became a more serious matter. And one day, Zelda informed her husband that she had fallen in love and she wished for a divorce.
Uh-oh.
And she wanted
to... That didn't go over too well.
No, he suddenly realized, you know, and there's again unsubstantiated that he had a duel. He challenged Edward to a duel.
Oh my.
Yeah.
How chivalrous.
I know. But he was not ready to lose his muse, his best character, you know?
Yeah,
and
she's giving him a lot of...
Yeah, exactly. Oh no.
Material.
And so he ended it by force. And when she asked her husband for the divorce, so that she could begin her new life, he not only refused her, he locked her into the house.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, he locked her away, actually, in a room in the house, until she withdrew the request. And
worse, the request.
Yeah, and she was very depressed. And shortly after there, she had her first suicide attempt.
Oh my goodness.
And many suggest that this was the incident in her life that really effectively broke her well.
That's where she probably got the reputation of being crazy.
There we go.
Woman.
Right. Maybe he drove her to craziness.
Well, getting locked in a room,
Yeah. You know, first he encourages her, and then, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
So, you know, that he could give her such a terrible punishment. I mean, it's very distressing. And the danger done to her psyche, it would haunt them both to the grave. And more disturbing, though, is the fact that he later confessed to encouraging the affair before he crushed it, because he recognized that by watching his wife's behavior toward her French lover, he could depict Daisy's affair with Gatsby with greater veracity.
That makes, in a weird, crazy way.
Life imitates
totally
art. Art imitates
right?
life, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God! But
seeing her exuberant and
yeah.
I wonder if he needed her to be in that heightened state of excitement and joy and love.
I know it's. But I mean, it's
how convoluted is that?
It's so manipulative. Yeah, I mean, it's so evil and manipulative. So human decency, as it said, bowed its head to artistic excellence, and somewhere within the misery of two people, in 1925 was born The Great Gatsby, the novel of its generation. Although it didn't happen right away, the book would later become a classic, but in its middling initial reception, it was found disappointing to Scott. Like he didn't get quite the accolades he expected initially.
Well, he needed a little more patience.
Right. But eventually,
eventually,
yes.
Yes.
But during this time, Fitzgerald continued to become increasingly abusive and dysfunctional. Fitzgerald both loved and hated his wife. And as her wild behavior grew and only seemed to increase, he began to grow suspicious of her. He turned more and more to booze and began to write less and less. And by the end of the decade, the Fitzgeralds' already quarrelsome marriage had grown more and more agitated, essentially. And Scott was struggling to write his fourth novel. And Zelda started to really seek creative outlets of her own. She had been really into ballet when she was younger. Yeah. I think I mentioned that. And she got back into ballet, which was, and she was actually dancing with a ballet troupe. And she had really, really started be very obsessively dancing, like practicing and get,
Well, I'm sure she needed to work off a little anxiety living with an alcoholic.
Who had locked her in a room. Yeah. But she also started writing short stories for magazines and receiving really positive reviews.
She was getting published.
Yeah. She was painting. She was swimming. And she was just trying to, find her own path since she was not allowed to love someone else. And as the Depression killed off the Jazz Age, Fitzgerald was forced to face the truth, though, about his wife, that the party needed to end. He decided there was something seriously wrong with her. And, she had been doing all these artistic things and kind of pursuing, but she had also been very depressed. She had been very depressed ever since the incident of losing this man she loved and him locking her away in her room. And in October of 1929, during a car trip to Paris, Zelda seized the car's steering wheel and tried to kill herself, her husband, and then 9-year-old daughter Scotty by driving over a cliff.
Oh, my.
I know.
Oh, dear.
I know. And, of course, after this, Zelda sought psychiatric treatment.
Sad.
Yeah. And then in 1930, she suffered a breakdown. She was hospitalized and diagnosed, perhaps correctly or incorrectly, with schizophrenia.
So after the incident where she fell in love and he locked her in the room, that was when all that crazy Zelda...
Right. That is when it started kind of...
Gotcha.
Yeah. And it's said that Scott returned home one evening to find an exhausted Zelda. She had gotten home from her ballet, which she was very obsessive about. Probably a little bit almost, obsessed, very obsessed. She was, practicing all the time, and she was just kind of, and she was seated on the floor and entranced with a pile of sand. And when he asked what she was doing, she could not speak, so he summoned a French physician who examined Zelda and informed him, "Your wife is mad. Your wife is mad."
Did he say it just like that?
No, I think he said it with a French accent, which I can't really do.
Well, that was good.
Your wife is mad. Your wife is mad. I can't do it. Sorry. But this is the thing.
Yes.
Many believe that Fitzgerald intentionally stoked the rumors that Zelda was crazy in order to cover his blatant theft of her literary work.
Whoa. So let's talk more about the theft.
We're getting there.
Okay.
We're getting there.
I want to hear about that.
So in his journal, Fitzgerald explicitly stated his plans to drive his wife toward a nervous breakdown in order to have her committed.
Oh my goodness. So had she already produced some work he wanted to help her?
Yeah, we're getting back to that.
Right.
Okay.
You can see where I want to go, Missy.
See, we're going to back up here.
Okay.
We're going to back up here.
Back up.
We're backing up. Okay. Remember Fitzgerald's second novel, The Beautiful and the Damned?
Yes.
That was his second novel, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first novel, we know that she was his muse. But probably he didn't quite have the access to her diaries at that point.
Oh, right.
Once they married, though, her diaries were fully at his disposal.
Are you telling me he lifted her diaries?
Well, as it turns out, Scott Fitzgerald lifted entire passages from Zelda's diaries.
Wow. This is scandalous.
I know. And I knew nothing of this.
Wow, me either.
I had no idea.
Yeah, I left off where Zelda was crazy.
I think most of us did.
Yeah, wow. This is blowing my mind.
I know. I think most of us did. And I think that was his intention.
Well,
I think his intention was to be to steal her, and she's crazy. Right?
Yeah.
It's so sad, the whole thing. And obviously it's not that cut and dry. There was a lot of tumultuous things going on in their marriage.
Did she know that he was lifting work out of her
diaries? Well, I'll get there. Okay, Scott was set to publish The Beautiful and the Damned, and he asked Zelda to write a review of the book in the New York Tribune.
Yeah.
Because she was actually writing some reviews at that point.
Right.
So in her scathing review,
Zelda
Zelda detailed for the first time what had been going on since they had first met and first become an item. And this is to quote Zelda in her review here. It seems to me that on one page I recognized a portion of an old diary of mine which mysteriously disappeared shortly after my marriage, and also scraps of letters which, though considerably edited, sounded to me vaguely familiar. In fact, Mr. Fitzgerald, I believe that's how he spells his name, seemed to believe that plagiarism begins at home.
So I take it that review was never published?
No, it was published.
It was published.
It was published.
Wow.
I don't think anybody really thought anything of it.
Wow.
Like, I think people swept it under the rug. He was the sensation. She was his, wackadoodle wife.
Right.
I don't know. And those comments did trigger many arguments. And, some people said she was lying. He never said anything.
He just didn't acknowledge
He just
it.
kept, Why he asked her to review it is confusing to me.
That is.
That's very odd.
But then, I guess maybe he expected her to support him in his work because he was writing for them, their
Right.
wealth, and
I don't know. Maybe they thought she wouldn't recognize her own writing. Who knows?
Or maybe he thought she wouldn't care.
But the thing about it is when Zelda began to receive requests to write books and articles, and she became more, she was writing reviews and she was writing short stories and she was starting to kind of gain popularity.
Yeah.
And this made him very resentful and very jealous. Mm-hmm. So the idea that his muse was getting her own opportunities to tackle subjects that he wanted to use in his own novels, their relationship began to deteriorate more and more.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So she was finally released from that first hospital in September of 1931. Mm-hmm. And in an attempt to keep his wife out of the asylum, or so it seemed, Scott hired nurses and attendants to care for Zelda at all times. And, there were periods when her behavior was merely eccentric, and then there were periods when her behavior was full-blown nutsy cuckoo, mm-hmm. right? Sometimes becoming a danger to herself and others. One time she threw herself in front of a train.
Oh my God.
She attacked a woman visiting her house for no reason. And despite her precarious mental health, the couple did travel back to her hometown of Montgomery, where her father was dying. Mm-hmm. So she went back to visit her dad. Uh-huh. And they stayed until he died. And when her father died, her mental health again deteriorated, and she had another full-blown nervous breakdown.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so she relapsed, and at that point, they didn't go back to Europe, or she didn't go back to Europe. She was she went to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Maryland, mm-hmm. and she would remain, though, in and out of sanitariums for the remainder of her life at that point.
Wow.
Yeah. But while she was hospitalized, she began working on a semi-autobiography, and it was a novel called Save Me the Waltz. And she decided, just for fun, to send a draft to Max Perkins, who was her husband's editor.
Oh,
mm-hmm.
Interesting.
So Fitzgerald, of course, when he found this out, Max was like, "This is pretty good. Why? Maybe you could edit it because it does need some editing, mm-hmm. and we can see what we can do with this." So he gladly said, "Oh, sure, I can do that." And instead, he lifted long passages from the book and used it in his own novel, Tender as the Night.
Oh my gosh. Wow. This is scandalous.
It's horrifying.
My gosh.
It's horrifying.
Wow.
I know. So Zelda was soon to publish that novel, but Fitzgerald was angered at this as he had already used whole passages from Zelda's manuscript. And it was enough passages that plagiarism was very apparent.
Oh my goodness.
So he said, "You can't publish that book."
Wow.
No, I'm publishing my book.
Missy, I owe you an apology because I was really annoyed when I came here and you weren't ready, but this is amazing. No wonder you weren't ready. This is like
Thank you for saying that, April.
Wow.
Because I have been, this took me, I was saying to April, I think this took me about 5 hours of research.
Oh my God.
And I feel like I could go back in. Like I said, I am just barely touching the surface.
Whoa.
I encourage everybody to, there's several books, there's there's so much out there, and I encourage everybody to do your own research because it's pretty fascinating.
It is.
And controversial. There's some people that don't quite believe it. Yeah. They're all men. No, I'm kidding. Just kidding. Okay. But the result of him being like pissed off, like, oh no, I'm using that in my book. I mean, you can't publish your book, was that Zelda was forced by her husband and their shared editor to edit her own manuscript and take out everything that he had used in his book. She had to take out of her book.
Goodness.
Which was, I guess, a very large portion of it. She had to rewrite a lot of it.
Wow.
And when it came out, Zelda's book was heavily criticized while Fitzgerald was highly praised.
Oh, of course.
It makes me sick. It just makes me freaking sick.
Wow.
Fitzgerald went on his way. Zelda was still hospitalized. He went off to California. Apparently he had an affair with movie columnist Sheila Graham. And Zelda remained for 4 years at a place called Highland under the care of Dr. Robert S. Carroll, who had been described as something of an original in American psychiatry. And he believed in treating mental illness in part with a regimen of diet and exercise, so that was good. And he also used other standard therapies, and Zelda really infrequently saw her husband and daughter and other family members, and she was very lonely. She was very lonely. But she made some progress, and she participated in the activities there, such as hiking and playing tennis. And she continued to write and paint and do all the things that she had done, which was great. And F.Scott Fitzgerald stayed in California. He never really recovered from his alcoholism. And he drank and smoked himself into a terminal spiral of cardiac disease. He had angina. He had all kinds of spells. He had artery disease, coronary artery disease.
He had a lot of problems, but I guess alcoholism will do that to you.
Yeah, he was not well, and he additionally gorged himself on sugary treats to abate his desire for more alcohol. And sadly, he died at the young age of 44 in 1940.
Wow, I didn't realize he died so young.
Yeah,
wow.
He died very young.
Although I guess not surprising when you think about the alcoholism.
Yeah, he died very young. And Zelda actually outlived him.
And what happened to Zelda when she was sort of free of him? Was it too late for her?
Yeah, she spent mainly, the rest of her life in mental institutions. She lived with her family for short periods. And at the same time, Scott's popularity waned and his income fell, their income fell. And so, it was a demise for both of them.
Oh, very sad.
It was a very sad demise.
How's their daughter? Her mother tried to drive her off a cliff.
Yeah. Again, there's lots out there about her.
Yeah.
I will say, like Caress Crosby, whose children were kind of, raised by other people.
Yeah.
So was Scotty.
Yeah.
So was Scotty.
Mm-hmm.
It's sad because, Fitzgerald, he became less and less popular. He became more and more sick. He's living out in California. And, everything deteriorated. His health, his status, his financial situation. And he solely blamed Zelda.
Oh, interesting.
For her mental illness and, the cost incurred from her mental illness and, everything about his demise, had to do with Zelda. He thoroughly blamed her.
So I have to ask, did he lift anything for The Great Gatsby?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Again, there's more information out there, but really... And we'll talk about that a little bit more here. I'm getting to that. But, when he wasn't lifting, and I'm not saying he lifted everything.
Right, yeah.
He was obviously a damn good writer.
Right.
And I'm not saying he lifted everything. But the things he lifted were her ideas, and he did passages, letters, actual writing. Yeah. And then, she was his muse. He encouraged an affair so that he could... write down her words.
So fascinating.
So that he could listen to her conversations with, he would eavesdrop. There was all kinds, so where do you draw the line? It seems like not only was he, actually copying her writing, but where do you draw the line? She was his muse. She was, situationally, taking ideas of hers from her, right? Where do you draw the line? Well, I don't know, So in 1940, Carol agreed to release Zelda to live with her widowed mother in Montgomery. That was the same year that F.Scott Fitzgerald passed away. And over the next decade, Zelda returned several times to Highland for brief periods of treatment. So although she lived at home at this point with her mom, she would go back and have treatment. So she was like out, at least she was out of the institution at this point. And she was working on writing a novel, and she, again, was living with her mom in North Carolina at this point. But on March 10th, 1948, a fire started. She was at the hospital, and she was actually scheduled for an electric shock therapy session. And she was sedated and locked in a waiting room, waiting for her session. And a fire broke out in the kitchen, and it spread through the floors of the building and via the dumbwaiter shaft, and Zelda was killed along with 8 other women.
Oh my goodness.
She was 47 years old.
Oh, gee.
So sad.
Wow.
So tragic.
That is tragic.
Yeah.
That's so sad.
Yeah, and that's another thing I need to research, like what happened to that novel she was working on.
Right.
I'm sure there's so much more information. Again, I am barely scratching the surface here. But there's a lot of people who say a lot of amazing things, and I am going to actually and I want to tell you too, like all this writing, we've gotten, we're not plagiarizing. We are, we have gotten this writing from amazing writers, this information. So they are all credited on our website. So you can go there and see and dig further into some of these writings of these people that we have quoted here today. But I'm going to quote right now. I'm going to talk a little bit about Jonathan Keats. He's a writer for Salon.com. And I'm going to actually directly quote him in a passage here. And the truth is that Scott used a great deal of Zelda's writing, credited to characters he modeled after her in every book he completed in his abbreviated life. That Zelda was Scott's muse is hardly news, and it comes as no surprise that her frank sexuality, the wild abandon with which she flaunted her body at parties, gave color to his stories. More has been written about the Fitzgeralds, their antics and affairs, than they possibly could have known about themselves. It's pretty interesting.
That is.
But maybe she would have been as good of a writer as Scott. We can't even rule that out. She could have even been a greater writer than him. But that's only because we lack adequate evidence to judge. Save Me the Waltz, her book, shows that anything could have happened had she realized her potential as a novelist. For a whole host of reasons, she didn't. The only potential she ever realized was as a novelty. Even had she not written Save Me the Waltz, she deserved as much credit as Scott for the role she played in making the 20s roar. In all their antics, they were collaborators. That's what they were. They were collaborators. That's a good point that Keats makes here. They set one another up and watched one another fall. But Scott did something even more. He wrote novels that will be read as long as humanity endures. 3 charges can be leveled against Scott in Zelda's bid for joint custody of his literary acclaim. The first, and most easily dismissed, is that he prevented her from writing to protect his own work. Of course, he's guilty as charged, and his characteristic cowardice and intense jealousy, to which he readily confessed, are no excuse for the abuse he inflicted upon his wife. Contrary to what Scott believed, greatness among authors is not an either-or proposition, and words are in unlimited supply. Neither Save Me the Waltz nor anything else that might have come from Zelda's pen could adversely affect the literary worth of what has been written by Scott. So, having roundly condemned Scott as a husband, we can turn to the serious business of judging him as an author. The second cause that might be advanced against him is that he relied on Zelda so completely for inspiration that the part her character plays in his novels isn't honestly his creation at all. As a husband, he was unsupportive of his wife's dreams and struggles, and as an author, he heavily plagiarized. As it turns out, large excerpts and quotes from Zelda's journals appeared in all of F.Scott Fitzgerald's novels. It's shocking. It's shocking. And I'm going to end with one more little section here. Again, a quote from the biography by Nancy Milford about Zelda, which is a wonderful biography, by the way. I have not read it. I am beginning to read it, and I'm excited about it, but yeah. In the end, Fitzgerald's unprecedented talent justifies his unorthodox tactics. What? The first test of literature is whether the whole is greater than the parts. As difficult as it is to manipulate the meanings loaded into individual words, to make literature by arranging whole sentences and paragraphs, to work with material as full of itself as Zelda's diaries and letters, and to make it support a whole world view is a monumental feat. We already venerate F.Scott Fitzgerald, the wordsmith, as even he couldn't have dreamed. Now, with more reason than ever to deplore him as a man and a husband, we equally, astonishingly, have means to appreciate the sublimation of his wife, her novelty, into art.
Wow, I am truly blown away. And I want to thank you for doing this, Sheela, for us, because honestly, that was a story that deserved telling, and I'm literally blown away.
Are you?
Yeah,
I am
really
too. And all I can think is, like, I know I'm being a little obsessive, April. I really am. I get very obsessed when I do my research.
Yeah, you do.
I go into the black hole of research, and I'm a very feeling person too. So as I cried.
Yes.
I was crying as I was reading and putting this piece together, and I mean, my heart hurts.
Yeah.
My heart.
Very powerful.
My heart hurts.
You know, I was certainly aware that F.Scott Fitzgerald used her as his muse, and that she appeared in all of his writings, and it was that reoccurring character. But until you were reading towards the end, the commentary, it really never struck me how much he supplicated her, both literally in terms of written content and in terms of just sort of stealing her.
Right. And he couldn't have just co-credited her or something.
Right.
He couldn't have ever, because he was so jealous of her. He was so jealous of her talents, of everything. He just devoured her. He devoured her.
And wife teams that work creatively to help one another and support each other, and this was like a cannibal, just eating her, or you know,
he did. He just ate her away.
Cannibalized her.
And he even said in his diary that, like, his desire to drive her crazy, to, like, lead her to mental illness.
Yeah.
So again, so that he could feast on her, you know, like he could use all of her writings and feast on her abilities and her talent. And, like, it's just, the whole thing is just sickening. And again, I'm sure it's not as black and white as I'm saying.
He was certainly a talented writer in his own
very
way.
very talented.
But
you know, is it the artist? Is it the man? You know, I don't know. I have a hard time with some of that. And, you know, we very well may hear from F.Scott Fitzgerald's family or people that, you know, are really going to argue this, you know. And again, this is something that is somewhat controversial and somewhat arguable. But there's a lot of evidence here too. Yeah. You know, and
well, no matter how you slice it, he certainly borrowed heavily from her and oppressed her. Yeah. And yeah, it's yeah, my heart is heavy right now. Oh.
My heart is heavy, but at the same time, I'm really grateful that we have this podcast.
Me too.
So that we can, you know,
have uncovered
bring light to some of these women and take them, you know, out of the shadows and tell their stories and illuminate them and
definitely,
you know,
we have found so many remarkable women in so many very different ways. And this is an honor.
Oh, thank you. And if you know of any remarkable women, you know, you have any suggestions for us?
Please let us know.
We would love to know. And we'd like to get to the point, too, where maybe we're doing some interviews with some remarkable women, you know?
That would be fun.
Yeah, you know, maybe your grandmother did something incredible and she would like to tell us about it. Like, we would love to hear about that. There's so much we would love to hear about. And, you know, please let us know. We want to hear from you for sure. And thank you for listening, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
And until next time, be well, and, you know, let's just keep supporting each other in this crazy world.
Definitely.
Awesome. Love you guys. Bye.
Bye.
Sheela, 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 Sheela.